because these two issues are closely linked. In that, as I just said, keeping the women in Afghanistan suppressed is a route to power. Until quite recently, Women for Afghan Women was very optimistic about about Afghanistan and the future of Afghanistan, despite the failures, despite the two main failures. The first one being the failure of American development policy there, and the second being the troops being taken out and sent to Iraq. And I might say the third, despite the corrupt government. But we are now more concerned. One of the problems is that the media in the United States is really has not told the Americans what is going on in Afghanistan. When I come back from Afghanistan and I see media clips about the country, I can't recognize it. Is that where I've just spent 6 months? It's like a different place. Oh, I only have 2 minutes. Okay, I'll speak faster. For example, how many of you know that not until the year, after millions of American aid sent to Afghanistan, not until the year 2020 will all Afghan children be in primary school. Think of that. This is intolerable. A child who is now 8 years old cannot get to primary school until the year 2020. This is an example of failure. If in the last 10 years we had done nothing but build schools or help the Afghans build their own schools and help them train teachers, things probably would be very different. Once the problem of women in the world, which I believe is the most serious problem the world faces today, the situation of women in the world is the most serious problem in the world. Once it was at the bottom of the list of global problems. It would be solved when all the other serious problems were solved. But I'm happy to say that things are changing. There is now, among international donors, international organizations and government, are now recognizing that the human rights for women are crucial to the stability of a country and crucial to global stability. That the subjugation of women causes economic stagnation, democratic instability, and vulnerability to extremism. International donors now, finally, including the United States, are ramping up programs aimed directly at the development of women. So this is a very positive step, and we have had other reasons for optimism. Women for Afghan Women, as I said, in 4 years, or less than 4 years, 3.5 years, has opened 5 family guidance centers. These family guidance centers are not only...
That's my job.
I only have a few more points. Okay. These family guidance centers are opening not only in cities like Kabul and Mazar, but also in Kunduz, where there are Taliban. It's a very dangerous situation in Taliban. We've just opened in Jalalabad, and we're getting support from local people, from governors. We get some support from courts. We win cases in court all the time. So this is a very positive factor, and it gives us a lot of hope for the country. But of course, as you all know, the security is deteriorating, and the government is no help. The United States support, even lukewarm support of the Karzai government, has been a disaster there. It has turned people in the droves against the United States. It's a very negative mark against us in addition to other negative marks. And then, of course, there is the whole aspect of impunity, the fact that the warlords are not held accountable for killing millions of Afghans and for virtually destroying their own country in their civil war. They are not held accountable. So I'm going to stop there. I can answer questions later.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, to be with you. I started writing and started working on looking at issues of women in conflict and post-conflict countries, basically women who were starting businesses in countries that were trying to recover from war in about 2005. Why does it matter? Well, why does it matter is because, first of all, they are the population you have left after war. Rwanda, post-genocide, was 77% female until a lot of people from the diaspora began to come back. Second of all, they're heads of household for the first time. And third of all, if you can get to women, you can get to children. And if you can get to children, you can move the entire family up the ladder in terms of the next generation. It really is about the next generation. Right now, I have been, so for the past 5 years, writing a lot of stories, some of which are on my website, which is justmyname.com, and mostly for the Financial Times and New York Times Global and Christian Science Monitor, most recently Daily Beast, about these unexpected entrepreneurs who nobody really looks for or thinks about in countries that are rebuilding. Right? So we are very used to seeing women as victims of war who deserve our pity, rather than as resilient survivors who pull families through regardless of the year or the conflict. And I think it sort of fits with our narrative, and I think that is in wealthy countries. Both men and women have that narrative. And I really do think that it is something that when you're on the ground and interviewing and spending time with women, you realize that it is not at all the case, because if they are still leading families or still at the helm of families, they have endured a great deal, survived a great deal, and supported their children through a great deal. There are a couple of things that, in terms of myths, that I always like to attack. The first one is that women as victims. The second is that they're not interested in business, right? So they are, these women are just taking care of their children. They're not interested in economic activity. Well, whether we classify it in wealthy countries as economic activity, what they're doing is supporting families and finding ways to feed their children. So we can call it whatever fancy term we'd like, but what they're doing is supporting families. And a lot of them are doing it with almost no help and with very little support. So I went to Bosnia in 2006 to do a story for the Herald Tribune about women-owned businesses and how they had played a role. And I interviewed a woman who had supported 14 members of her extended family in the final years of the Bosnian conflict because her husband was fighting and her son was injured. And she had started by squatting in a garage in Sarajevo, just sewing pillowcases, things like that, and then going to any market she could find and selling it. So today, she has a factory that employs about 26 women, all of whom, or at least most of whom, are sending their children to school. And she got her first bank loan about, I don't know, I think probably almost 10 years after she had actually started, because no bank would lend to her, because there's not a lot of risk capital in these places that are obviously unquestionably risky. Her first loan of 20,000 euro came from a woman in Spain she had cleaned houses for during the conflict. Because for all the money coming into these countries, particularly post-conflict, there was no money for women who wanted to start businesses. The other funny story about that particular visit was that I had gone to a number of multilateral agencies to try to, as journalists do you know women who own businesses? Is there anybody in particular I should interview? I said, oh, well, we have some women selling cheese by the side of the road, but we don't really have women who own businesses. So that brings me to my third myth, which is that all women are in microfinance. It is a wonderful tool. Microfinance is terrific, but we really risk it becoming a female canal in which we only place women. it becomes a corner that is not the mainstream, and if you look at what causes GDP growth, it is not sustained investment in microfinance. It is a wonderful, wonderful subsistence tool. I've worked on it, I completely believe in it, but we really make ourselves feel better by saying that our $25 loan is going to be the answer to poverty in Bangladesh. Now, and I mean this because what I'm saying is that these women on the ground there are really trying to make that leap, oftentimes from micro to the next step, right, to medium level, or very small business from very micro business. And there's so little support out there. So in Bosnia, I went to this multilateral gentleman who worked there, and I said, do you have any entrepreneurs I should interview? I'm looking for people who have, at least 3 to 5 employees, maybe more. It's a pretty fluid definition. It just depends on, what kind of revenues, et cetera. And he said, well, aside from the cheese lady who I already mentioned, we just don't have them. We don't have women who own small businesses here. And so when the story ran in the front page of the Herald Tribune business feature section for that weekend, I emailed it to him and said, just in case you're ever looking for women to interview, here are about 5. And I was in your country for about 7 days. So that just shows you that we're not used to it. And I honestly think that we all work in silos. So the development people do development, the business people do business. There's very little crossover in between. The policy people do policy, the economics people do economics, the right arm doesn't talk to the left, and we all say, oh my goodness, isn't that too bad that women aren't interested in these things? And spend a day and just ask a couple people, and you can usually find a few women who own businesses of varying scale.